The story opens with police officers attempting to gain entry to someone's home. They notice the person inside is watching through the peephole, casting a shadow. The resident refuses to open the door, claiming to have a condition that prevents them from going outside or being exposed to the external environment. When the officers mention that the person stole a neighbor's newspaper, the resident argues they left $5 for a 50-cent paper. The person inside begins citing legal precedents about probable cause and the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, arguing that forcing someone to leave their house constitutes a seizure protected under the Fourth Amendment. Meanwhile, the officers discover concerning evidence outside, lots of camp stove fuel and a tampered breaker box. After a final warning that they'll break down the door, the resident agrees to let them in under strange conditions. No electronic devices allowed, specifically no phones, no walkie-talkies, no flashlights, definitely no tasers. The scene shifts to James McGill, Jimmy, visiting a client named Ricky Sipes. Jimmy arrives in a modest car, explaining it belongs to his assistant and that his Mercedes is in the shop. Ricky mentions seeing Jimmy on TV during that billboard thing, which gave him two insights. Jimmy ain't afraid to put himself out there and believes in the real America. Ricky launches into a patriotic speech about freedom, self-sufficiency, and how government regulation is crushing the spirit of entrepreneurship. He then reveals his grand plan. He wants to secede from the United States with his 1,100 acres of self-sustaining property with solar power and wells. Jimmy enthusiastically agrees to take the case, citing potential battles all the way to the Supreme Court. When asked about his rate, Jimmy quotes $450 an hour, but Ricky offers a flat $1 million retainer, half up front. The payment, however, is in currency, backed by the full faith and credit of the sovereign Sandia Republic. Next, Jimmy meets with Roland Jacques, who has him sign a non-disclosure agreement before showing his invention. Roland's creation is a toilet training device called Tony the Toilet Buddy that speaks inappropriate, sexually suggestive phrases when children use it. When Jimmy points out that the device sounds rather sexual, Roland becomes deeply offended, insisting he created it for children. Jimmy suggests it might sell well in wealthier Pacific Rim nations, comparing it to Viagra, which was originally invented for hypertension. Outraged, Roland kicks Jimmy off his property. Jimmy discovers a more promising clientele in elderly people needing legal services. He meets with Mrs. Strauss, an elderly woman organizing her will and the distribution of her collection of Hummel figurines to various relatives. In their detailed discussion, Mrs. Strauss explains that her Alpine Shepherd boy Hummel will go to her nephew Clarence if he finishes college, otherwise to her niece Raylene. However, Raylene wouldn't then receive the girl with the geese, Hummel, which would go to cousin Helen as long as she never remarries Frederick. The toe-headed twins of figurines are earmarked for Reverend Lawrence's grandson. Jimmy impresses Mrs. Strauss with his attention to detail, correcting her when she confuses Reverend Lawrence with Reverend Haynes. The grandson of the former is supposed to receive the lute-playing angel because he was in the choir. Mrs. Strauss is delighted, commenting that she thought all lawyers were idiots. Jimmy quips, "No, only half of us are idiots. The other half are crooks." Their chemistry is apparent as Mrs. Strauss flirtatiously says if she were 40 years younger, she'd have Jimmy buy her a pina colada. When Jimmy mentions drafting a DNR, do not resuscitate, order, he jokes he'll bring a blender and some pineapple. Mrs. Strauss mentions she knew she'd like Jimmy when she saw how he saved that poor man on the television, referring to his billboard publicity stunt. Jimmy brings up his fee of $140, saying he'll accept half now and half upon completion of the documents. Mrs. Strauss counts out the money in full, and they continue their meeting. In a later scene, Jimmy discusses his day with his friend Kim, mentioning that he completed 2 wills and started a living trust that day. "Old people love me," he says. The other person suggests he might have a future in elder law, and Jimmy jokes about whether he could handle all that glamour. The conversation grows more serious as they discuss how seniors need advocates to help them deal with insurance companies and unscrupulous relatives who might steal their savings or pain medications. Getting old sucks. Seniors need someone on their side, they observe. Conversation is interrupted by a call from Howard, which leads to the revelation about Chuck's situation. Chuck, Jimmy's brother, suffers from what he calls electromagnetic hypersensitivity, a condition where he believes he's allergic to electricity. Jimmy rushes to the hospital where Chuck has been admitted after an incident involving police. Chuck is connected to medical equipment, which Jimmy frantically tries to disconnect, insisting, "No electricity, you understand." When hospital staff try to stop him, Jimmy becomes combative, yelling, "What kind of torture chamber you running? He's allergic to electricity. You might as well throw him into a microwave." Dr. Cruz, the attending physician, explains that Chuck was found in an agitated state after stealing his neighbor's newspaper. She recommends committing Chuck for 30 days of psychiatric observation at a facility in Las Cruces, explaining that as a family member, Jimmy can submit a petition for evaluation. Jimmy is reluctant, and when Chuck wakes up, he's lucid and articulate, though distressed by the electronic equipment around him. He asks if anyone present has a phone, pager, or anything with a battery, showing visible relief when these devices are removed. Chuck explains his condition in medical terms: electromagnetic hypersensitivity. For reasons unknown, my nervous system has become sensitized to certain frequencies of electromagnetic radiation. He lists his symptoms: burning sensations on his skin, sharp pain in his bones, muscle fatigue, heart palpitations, blurred vision, tinnitus, vertigo, nausea, and shortness of breath. When Dr. Cruz asks when these symptoms began, Jimmy interjects that Chuck left his office 18 months ago, making it almost 2 years of suffering. Chuck becomes defensive when he realizes the doctor is considering psychiatric commitment, insisting his condition is physical, not mental. He appeals to Kim, who's also present, asking if she's ever seen him exhibit signs of mental illness in the decade she's known him. Chuck argues that committing him would violate the least drastic means principle of Section the 11th of January, 43, Part E3, comparing a month in psychiatric care to a month in a wood chipper because of the pain from electronic devices. When asked about daily life, Chuck explains he uses white gas lanterns for light, a camp stove for cooking, and a cooler filled with ice for refrigeration. After examining Chuck, Dr. Cruz speaks privately with Jimmy about Chuck's condition. She demonstrates that Chuck's symptoms aren't physical by secretly activating a hospital bed electronic control without Chuck noticing, until Jimmy points it out, at which point Chuck immediately feels pain. The doctor explains that Chuck's condition is a manifestation of something deeper and not physically real. Jimmy acknowledges this possibility but argues, Chuck is smarter than you and me. So we are not talking him out of this. He reveals he's been taking care of Chuck's needs, bringing white gas, food, toilet paper, ice, and other necessities. Dr. Cruz suggests Jimmy is enabling rather than helping Chuck. She warns that Chuck's living conditions, Coleman lanterns and camp stoves indoors, could be dangerous, potentially burning down his house or neighborhood. She also points out that Chuck has no way to call for help if he has an accident. She urges Jimmy to help commit his brother, saying, ignoring this won't make it go away. The scene is interrupted by Howard Hamlin's arrival. Howard informs Jimmy that he's talked to the district attorney, who absolutely will not sign off on any commitment papers, insisting Chuck is of sound mind. Jimmy accuses Howard of opposing commitment because if Chuck were committed, Jimmy would become his legal guardian and could cash him out of HHM Hamlin and McGill, the law firm where Chuck is a named partner. A heated argument ensues, with Howard accusing Jimmy of spite. Jimmy initially threatens to commit Chuck just to make Howard a sweat, but ultimately decides to take his brother home instead. Jimmy helps Chuck back to his house, carefully leading him inside. Chuck requests coffee, and as Jimmy prepares to make it, he notices something significant, a newspaper on the floor. Jimmy realizes that Chuck's recent episode was triggered by seeing a story about Jimmy in the paper. And back at Chuck's home, Jimmy brings up the newspaper, suggesting Chuck didn't get sick from retrieving it but from reading about Jimmy. Chuck dismisses this, saying he's too tired for this argument. Jimmy defends his recent publicity stunt, the billboard incident that appeared in the paper, describing it as legitimate advertising, not a return to his slip-in Jimmy conman days. You think the billboard thing was unethical? But it was promotion. It was advertising, that's all, he argues, even citing the Supreme Court case Bates versus State Bar of Arizona that legalized attorney advertising. Jimmy explains that the publicity has brought him legitimate business, wills and trusts, and that he's starting to specialize in elder law. He elaborates on the field, describing how seniors need protection from relatives coming after their savings, telemarketers, reverse mortgage scams. Chuck responds that this sounds promising but maintains it has nothing to do with his condition. Jimmy makes an unsolicited promise to Chuck: the billboard was a one-time thing. I'm a good lawyer. I just needed some razzmatazz, to get the ball rolling. Some showmanship. That's all it was. It's done now. It's over. He pledges to play by the rules from now on, giving clients the best representation I know how to provide. Most significantly, Jimmy declares, slip-pin Jimmy, he's back in Cicero. Dead and buried. Chuck responds with a skeptical, we'll see, and goes to make coffee, leaving the sincerity of Jimmy's promise in question. The final scene shows Jimmy fully embracing his new elder law practice. He visits what appears to be a retirement home, distributing business cards with the slogan, need a will, call McGill. He's charming and friendly with the residents, complimenting them and engaging in small talk. He even jokes with the parking attendant about the complete annotated book of rules for parking validation. The chapter ends with Jimmy finding his professional niche, seemingly committed to his new path in elder law, though the lingering question remains whether he'll truly leave behind his questionable tactics or continue to blur ethical lines in pursuit of success.